Yeah, glad to have you.
Go ahead, Karan. What's that?
Sorry, I was saying I'm glad we're able to schedule Andrew to come talk. The presentation was originally going to happen back in the spring, but we all know everything in the spring got messed up this year. So I'm glad he's able to come back to share with us.
Well, I'm glad you're back, Andrew. But the thing is, we weren't going to be going anywhere. We're all stuck at home. So here we are. Monty, can you tell us how many folks have logged in?
35.
35. I think that's a full house standing room only.
And more coming.
And more coming. Yeah. I'll give it a couple more minutes if it's okay with everybody.
Yeah, I do know, Randy, that people have had some confusion about how to sign in because I guess Marty's personal room he uses for other meetings. So I've been getting emails throughout the last couple of days saying, "What is this 4 p.m. meeting, or what's this thing at noon?" So I think there's been some confusion. So
sorry about that. I wish they could help me at work too.
Well, I have not been getting Monty's work email, so that's a good thing. Well, I'll tell you what, I got a couple minutes after. I do like to try and start things on time, if you guys don't mind. Monty, if it's possible, if you can mute everyone, or if not, if people can mute themselves, that would be appreciated.
Yep, I'll go ahead and I'll mute everyone. Just unmute yourself again. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm good.
And am I unmuted now?
Yeah, you're good, Randy.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. All right. Hey, good evening, everybody. This is a good opportunity for us to
has joined the meeting.
Which is a great opportunity for us to do some collaborative work between two very good TU chapters that are side by side. And we've got a lot of great chapters here in Maryland and in the region. And the fact that we're able to get together to do something like this, I think is, one, it's unique, but also it speaks to the times that we're in. But also, I think, COVID or not, I think we have opportunities ahead of us to do more like this. And I look forward to having these kind of collaborative opportunities. I do have a couple of slides I want to show, and I'm sorry, many of them are specific to the Potomac Patuxent TU chapter, but just bear with me if you don't mind. As you can see, TU chapter usually have monthly meetings, and this month is going to be the kickoff of virtual meetings, and we're happy to do this. I just want to make an announcement that we did have an outing out to Western Maryland at the earlier part of October. This is a picture of the PhD pool. We had about 15 to 17 chapter members come out for that. It was a spectacular weekend weather-wise, and some folks reported catching a lot of fish, and a few folks reported catching only a few fish, but they were 20 plus inches in size. And then there was one individual who broke his fly rod and found a net in the Savage River. So I don't know if he's the lucky one or not, but that would be myself. Our next outing is scheduled for October 25th, and we're going to go up to Pennsylvania to Big Spring. And I mentioned this, this is something that we organized for our chapter members, but everyone's invited. So NCCTU, Andrew, your leadership, your rank and file membership, join us if you'd like. The only thing I do ask is that you go to our website and fill out the registration form, and that's on pptu.org. And we want to have people register in advance. And this is an annual outing, just like the trip out to Western Maryland was, that draws a good crowd. And this is a beautiful spring creek up north of us, a couple-hour drive. It's fantastic fishing, beautiful place. And I don't know if folks are on our PPTU listserv, but there was a fishing report posted not that long ago, about in the last hour or two, of some very good fishing that was going on up there. So mark October 25th on your calendar if you have an interest in joining us up at Big Spring. I do want to mention to my chapter members that we do have an annual supporting contribution of $20. This is a voluntary contribution. Excuse me. We do ask members to help out. This is above and beyond your PPTU membership. And this helps us do a lot of things in the area, working with the women, the Chesapeake Fly Fishing Women's Group, Boy Scouts, everything else. We're looking forward to getting past this COVID issue and being able to do things back out in the community again. The $20 voluntary contribution does help us out with a lot of different activities. So please do consider supporting that. If you have any questions, please reach out to Jay Shepard. He is our coordinator for membership and the supporting contribution. As you can see in the picture, and as you see what I'm wearing here now, you can get your very own PPTU embroidered shirt. We sell the hats, but the shirt is your own shirt. We just embroider it for you. So that's what I had done with this one. I love it. It's great. I took my favorite fishing shirt, actually 2 of them. That's what you see in the photo there, and gave them to Lou, and Lou had them embroidered for us. And it raises a little bit of money for the chapter, but mainly what it does is promote the chapter to other folks when we're out on the streams. And I encourage everyone who's a member of PPTU, or if there's folks on board that have not joined a chapter yet, please do consider joining us or joining NCCTU and having embroidered shirts made for yourself. I also want to mention Amazon Smile. For those of you who do shop on Amazon, register for Amazon Smile and register if you're a PPTU member. Put PPTU as your charity of choice, and that raises a little bit of money that comes from the Amazon Smile funds that comes back to our chapter. And we appreciate those who have done this in the past. We look forward to you doing it. We look forward to you doing it down the road. Amazon Smile is a great way to raise a little money while you're doing shopping. It doesn't raise the cost of your shopping experience at all, but it does bring some money back to the chapter. I'm going to close with a very special thank you. And I believe Ken is on our Zoom meeting tonight. And this is a thank you to Ken Bauer. Ken has been our PPTU mentor since 2003. So if my math is right, that's the last 17 years that Ken has been mentoring first-time new people to fly fishing, new people to Trout Unlimited, new people to fishing in the greater Mid-Atlantic area. And he's made a lot of great friends, and he's done a lot for fly fishing and TU in general. And this note here is just an acknowledgement to say thank you to Ken. And everyone on the Zoom, please do me a favor, raise a glass if you got one, or give a hand clap to Ken Bauer for all the fine work you've been doing for us, Ken. So Ken, this is for you. Thank you very much. You're a great man, have done great things for all of us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew Reichart and Andrew Sarcinello to go ahead and give us our main presentation for the night, unless there's any other announcements that need to be made. I just want to close with getting out of the screen. So Monty, if you could get me out of hosting the screen share, great. Otherwise, I need to figure out how to do it.
Just a question, is Andrew Reichart taking the screen or Andrew Sarcinello?
Andrew Sarcinello.
All right, I'm gonna make you a presenter.
Okay.
Thank you, Andrew.
All right, Andrew, you should have the option to share your screen now.
Okay. Let's see if I can get this. I've not used WebEx before, but I think it's similar to all the other apps everyone's been using lately.
Yep, we can see your screen.
You can see it? Great.
Yep.
Andrew R., did you want to say anything before we start?
No, just good luck and Godspeed.
He's saying that because he knows how many hours on end I can talk about this subject. Yeah, my name's Andrew Sarcinello. I want to share with you all some information about wild trout populations in Maryland, things I've learned as I've been going all around the state to all kinds of obscure little streams. What are the problems facing these trout? What's the status of them across the board? How do you find them? How do you catch them when you do find them? And then at the end, I want to bring this all back to PPTU's home watershed, the Patuxent River, and talk about the wild trout population that exists there. So I'll get started. Okay, so just a quick background of myself, kind of why I'm here. I have been serving as the National Capital Chapter of Trout Unlimited Conservation Chair for about the past year. And I personally focus on the cold water conservation projects. Our chapter does a lot of warm water and like Rock Creek, Potomac River work as well. When it comes to fly fishing, my full-on obsession, passion, whatever you want to call it, is exploring small streams for wild trout. Since 2015, I have caught at least one wild trout in over 70 different Maryland streams. Throughout my fishing adventures in Maryland, I discovered 3 brook trout streams that were previously unknown to Maryland Department of Natural Resources. 2 of those were in Baltimore County, one was in Harford County. The one in Harford County has since received upgraded environmental protections because of me discovering the brook trout there, which that was very gratifying to have all this fishing actually result in something meaningful. If you're on Instagram and you want to follow along with my wild trout and other fishing adventures, my Instagram is Suburban Fly Fisher. So I'm talking about the central region today. So where am I talking about specifically? In Maryland's fisheries department, say the areas with trout that they would consider the central region are Montgomery, Howard, Carroll, Baltimore, and Harford counties. And I'm going to throw in also in this presentation Frederick and Cecil counties. So within that area, what I think is missed or not widely known among Maryland's angling community, within the corridor from, say, Hagerstown, Maryland, over to Cecil County, which is adjacent to Delaware, and then south to Montgomery County. Within that area, wild trout, brook brown or rainbow or any mix of those inhabit over 150 different streams and approximately 400 miles of water. And I think about half of those are publicly accessible, at least for some portion of their length, meaning they flow through local or state parks, nature preserves, county wildlife management areas, and sometimes private owners have designated fishing areas such as Beaver Creek. And now, speaking of a stream like Beaver Creek, when people talk about wild trout fishing in Maryland, if you Google it, you're probably going to come up with the same 5 streams for the most part. And those streams are Beaver Creek, the Gunpowder, the Savage River, the North Branch Potomac, and maybe Big Hunting Creek as well. I'd say those are kind of the big 5 wild trout fisheries in Maryland. And those are all phenomenal wild trout streams. They deserve all the attention that they get. But I will say in this presentation, every picture of a stream that you see, every picture of a fish that I have included here, not a single one is from any of those 5 streams. So kind of the purpose of this is, I want to encourage people to explore more than just those 5 streams, and it's seeing is believing. So if I can show you guys some examples of what's out there, what I've found, I think it's good for groups such as Trout Unlimited and any other conservation groups you have to know what you have to protect it. So that's kind of my philosophy on sharing some of this information. I'll try not to get too specific with individual streams, but I do lean toward the like sharing more information, and a lot of people lean the opposite way. One other thing real quick, I do have a lot to cover. There's going to be an extensive Q&A session at the end, and I just ask everyone just hold your questions till the very end. You'll get a chance to ask questions. One interesting thing about Maryland that is not true in all states is that if a naturally reproducing trout population is found in a stream, that stream gets special environmental protection by Maryland Department of the Environment. It's called a Use 3 designation. And what that means is there cannot be a discharge into a Use 3 stream that exceeds a water temperature of 20 degrees Celsius, which is about 68 degrees Fahrenheit. The other interesting thing about Maryland is it is the southernmost state on the East Coast that supports wild trout in what's called its Piedmont region. And that's just a term for kind of the low rolling hill type terrain that is found east of the Appalachians and east of the Blue Ridge. So when we talk about climate change affecting wild trout, Maryland is really a canary in the coal mine because it has these high risk, low latitude, low elevation wild trout streams, and states from Virginia south cannot claim the same. For the most part, in Maryland, you have your native brook trout, in some cases wild brook trout, where brook trout have been introduced to streams where they have now started reproducing. That's only happened in 2 or 3 cases, I think. And you have your wild brown trout. There are some wild rainbow trout in Maryland, but it's such a small number. I'm not really going to talk about them in this presentation. So brook trout and brown trout in Maryland are on 2 very different tracks. According to Maryland DNR, brook trout in the central region have vanished from 50% of previously inhabited streams in only the past 30 years. Brook trout are primarily in trouble due to urbanization and competition with brown trout. 80% of the brook trout streams that are remaining are isolated. So that means the trout in these streams are confined to these small headwater trickles that don't connect to a larger waterway that supports brook trout. And so they're basically at this point, most of them are genetically isolated, and in the long term, that's very bad for its studies have shown that is detrimental to their ability to survive environmental changes, such as what could be brought on by development or climate change. Just give me 1 second. Okay. Brown trout, on the other hand, contrary to what I would think is popular belief in Maryland, I would say the range of brown trout is actually expanding right now. And that's because brown trout are moving into streams that were previously occupied by brook trout. Not all of that is due to interspecies competition. Some of those brook trout streams, when the development increases, they become no longer suitable for brook trout, and brown trout are kind of pushing in at the same time. So it's kind of a chicken or the egg scenario. Are the brook trout losing their habitat, or are the brown trout replacing the brook trout? Brown trout are very good at expanding their range on their own. So, for example, if you have a watershed and brown trout become established in one stream, and 10 miles away there's another stream that is somehow connected that has suitable habitat for brown trout and suitable water temperatures, probably within 10 to 20 years, brown trout are going to find that other stream and they will colonize that stream as well. And this has happened quite a few places across Maryland. once brown trout are established, it's very rare for them to become extirpated. You may see a degradation in the quality of the fish, the quality of the fishing as environmental stresses increase. But for them to completely be eradicated from a stream is pretty rare. I like to say you pretty much have to drop a nuke on a brown trout stream to get rid of them. But it has happened in Maryland, and I'll go through a few of those. I'll go through a few of those examples later. When you're talking about streams that have been already documented across Maryland, I'd say 95% of Maryland's wild trout populations are documented somewhere. And there are some public resources that I use all the time that are largely responsible for me being able to go out and catch trout in dozens and dozens of streams. The one I like probably the most is the MBSS Stream Health Map. MBSS stands for Maryland Biological Stream Survey. MBSS hides on their survey results on this map, they hide threatened or species of special concern, and that includes brook trout. So on this map, you're only going to find brown and rainbow trout, and you're not going to find if they were wild or stocked. And I would show these links, but I think we'll just have to revisit them if we have time later. But I would, yeah.
Just one other thing I wanted to flag for everybody. I included 2 additional links. One is, gives you an explanation of those use designations that Andrew was previously talking about, which are from class 1 to class 4. The other thing, Andrew was talking about the changes in land use in Maryland. The state government does track land use changes, and basically what they found is that the amount of land in Maryland used that's been developed has actually doubled in the last 40 years, even though the population's only increased 39%. So both of those resources are in the chat and can be useful as you're kind of doing your own intel.
Great, thanks, Andrew. So back to MBSS. Those survey results that are on this map, they have really great info on. In some sites, they have water temperature info, macroinvertebrates, and forage fish. So they're not sampling for trout; they're sampling for all kinds of biological criteria. It's just extremely useful. Probably my favorite resource. Maryland DNR themselves, the freshwater fisheries department, they publish monthly reports. I didn't link to them here because they have some very sensitive information sometimes on some of the brook trout streams. But if you dig around on their website on the freshwater fisheries page, you can probably find it. They do. So the monthly reports in the summer talk about some of their results from the recent wild trout surveys, and it's sometimes they put names of some very, very obscure streams in there, and they'll also talk about if it's the first time a stream has been found to have wild trout, or if it's like a repeat, like detailed annual type survey. So that can come in handy, but that's probably a smaller number of streams that you'll find from there. And then the last link, the MDE designated use map, those use 3 streams are highlighted in green on that map. It doesn't necessarily mean they have wild trout. Use 3 can also be achieved by having a certain cold water threshold met or presence of certain stoneflies. And last year, Steve Milan did a presentation for you guys and spoke at length about exactly what these designations mean and what the sampling means. So the use 3 map can be very helpful, but it can also mislead you. When you're trying to find wild trout, I think the main limiting factor in Maryland is not so much, oops, I just I just lost screen sharing.
Are you still able to share again, or do you need me to make you? Oh, there you go.
I think I'm back. Yep.
You're good.
Okay. So in Maryland, there's a lot of streams that have wild trout that go right up to the threshold of what trout can survive. And I think it's more of a limiting factor than erosion or siltation and lack of spawning habitat. I think trout can move to find spawning habitat if they need it. So usually water temperature I've found is what defines where the wild trout are going to be in Maryland. And a couple points I want to make here: the stream thermometer is your best friend. And it's not just determining whether the fish are going to be stressed. You can also use it to determine if it's even possible for them to survive in a stream. So, and there's a couple things about temperature, like we have kind of rules where, we don't want to try to do catch and release fishing for wild trout when the water temperature is above 68. But in the case of brown trout, they can survive water temperatures up to 80 degrees. It doesn't mean you should fish for them when it's above 68, but they can hunker down in a deep pool and stop eating and survive, a few weeks where the afternoon water temperature is 80 degrees. Penns Creek in Pennsylvania, a famous wild trout stream, exceeds 80 degrees every summer, and it's loaded with brown trout. Brook trout. I've noticed the adult fish show stress and change their behavior when the water temperature exceeds 65. They tend to kind of just go into hiding, or they'll cluster up in deep pools, and it's just obvious if they're clustered in pools, they're kind of sweating it out. So I would advise not fishing for brook trout above 65 Fahrenheit. If you do, you're likely to just catch a bunch of fingerling brook trout. It's generally just not really worth the effort then. And then on the flip side, when you have cold water temperatures, these streams that are warm water streams in the late spring into summer and early fall, both brook and brown trout will use those streams during the cold months of the year. Then when it comes June and the water's heating up, they'll retreat back into the cold tributaries.
Hey, Andrew.
Yeah.
One other thing, just on the temperature discussion around brook trout. Many of you are probably aware of this, but some of you may not. The Piedmont brook trout populations that we have here in Maryland up into Pennsylvania actually have a unique gene that allows them to survive in warmer temperatures than those you'd find with brook trout that exist in the Appalachian Range. Which is why protecting those gene pools is so important, is because they really are unique, and their resilience to temperature is unlike any other fish, any other brook trout subspecies you can find, genealogical.
Yeah, and there's also, I didn't have time to include it in this, but DNR has some data that shows Piedmont brook trout have much higher growth rates than Catoctin mountain brook trout. So there definitely are some differences in those fish, and that's why it's, as you said, it's why it's so important to protect them. The other thing wild trout need is habitat. A trout needs to, for a wild trout population to exist, the trout in the stream need to be able to survive to be 2 to 3 years old. So for brook trout, you're talking larger than 6 inches, larger than 8 inches for brown trout, depending on the growth rate in the stream. Sometimes that 2 or 3 year old fish could be larger. But in order to survive for multiple years in what is often kind of a harsh environment, they need depth and overhead cover. So many Maryland streams suffer from high flows due to stormwater runoff. And what that does is it displaces woody debris onto the banks and leaves the stream bed without much overhead cover. And that can either cause the loss of a trout population. I think it's responsible for why a lot of brook trout populations have been lost. But it also results in less hiding spots to grow large fish. I will say, I think the brown trout, especially in like Baltimore County, they really have adapted to like facility types of streams. There's many streams in Baltimore County where there's dozens and dozens of fish in like 100-yard section, but there might not be a single one over 10 inches. And that's because the habitat is lacking. So it's still a wild trout stream, it's still significant, but it just might not be the place you go expecting to catch a 15-inch brown. So I would say if you have cold water, depth, overhead cover, and a variety of food, you'll probably have large wild trout present. If you have cold water, but it has some flash flooding and erosion, siltation issues, you're probably going to see less food. You will definitely have more predation from, for example, blue herons. And as a result, you could still have wild trout. You probably still will have wild trout because of the cold water, but they're going to be a lot smaller on average. If you're lacking the cold water, but there's depth and cover, depending on if there's other wild trout streams in the watershed, it could be a seasonal wild trout stream that you're looking at. If it's lacking all of that, you're very unlikely to find wild trout. Here's an example of why the woody habitat in the stream is so important. A friend and I think Greg DeSalvo is on the call, but we were fishing this little stream in Baltimore County. And we came to this, we weren't finding much. And then we came to this area where there's this fallen log across the stream and you can see this nice pool right below it. And he made a cast, his first cast into there, he caught a native brook trout. So imagine if a housing development comes in and builds on top of that watershed, you get flash floods, that log gets blasted up onto the bank. You've just taken away a section of stream that used to support adult trout, which are capable of spawning and sustaining the population. Rock slabs are great habitat for many species of fish, but wild trout especially, because they're so wary of overhead predation from birds. They love rock slabs. And if you're fishing a brook trout stream like the one in this photo, and you're throwing a dry fly just into the center of the pools, you're going to miss a lot of fish and a lot of the nicer brook trout. They're going to be hiding under these rocks. And if you drop a little streamer or a nymph or something that sinks down along that rock ledge, they'll come out and eat it. Otherwise, they might not see or fly. So here's an example of what. So this is a fish that was living in that spot in the last slide. And you can notice how dark this fish is. And it's adjusting to that darker environment of living under the rock. And if you see brown trout do the same thing, they get a very dark hue if they've been living under a rock. So you can tell by the color of a fish what kind of habitat it's been living in. Tree root pools, usually they're associated with a bend in the stream, which is that's kind of automatically a deeper spot, but they also provide that overhead cover that adult trout need. This particular spot provided probably my biggest surprise of the year, which was this 18-inch wild brown trout was hiding out under those tree roots. So I've talked about, what resources there are to, locate the public streams, the ones that are well documented already. But what if you want to branch out and do your own exploring? What do you look for? And I say just use everything available to try and learn something about the stream before you go. Going back to the two critical components, temperature and habitat. Look at Google Earth. Is the stream well shaded? And if so, it might stay cool enough for trout. Again, bring your stream thermometer in the summer and you'll have your answer. But and are there ponds or lakes upstream? If there's a lot of ponds in a watershed, it's probably going to send the water temperature higher than what trout can survive. It'll probably send it over 80 degrees. When it comes to habitat, look at the surrounding terrain. Topographic maps, or even on Google Maps, if you go to what they call terrain view, it's extremely helpful in locating where terrain is steep and where it's flat. The steep terrain, your stream's probably, cutting through a ridge or making bends up against a cliff. You're going to have some nice rock ledge pools. I found there are streams in Maryland where there are no trout except in basically the steepest part, which may only be 100 yards long. And then the flat water, if it's forested and cold enough, that's where you find like your bends, your fallen trees, and that can be great habitat too. It just needs to be cold enough. If you have a stream in mind, come up with a plan for how you're going to access it. Commonly repeated false statement in Maryland is that if you're in the stream, you're on public property. That is not true. The private property owners do own the stream bottom in Maryland. So be very mindful of private property. Just ask instead of trying to sneak around. And then look at those sources I mentioned a few slides ago. See if you can determine if wild trout have been confirmed in the stream before or not. But the most important thing is how recently were they confirmed. If it's 20 years ago, a good thing you can do is go to Google Earth, and I'll show you on the next slide. They have a tool where you can look at old imagery from, in many cases in Maryland, you can get imagery from the early 90s. And a lot of streams have not been surveyed since the early 90s. So you want to look at how has the land around the stream changed since that last survey that confirmed trout. If you see housing developments, there's a decent chance it no longer holds wild trout. Although personally, I'd still explore it. If there hasn't been much change and you see a lot of forests, forests mature over time. They get taller, the shade gets deeper, and trout populations in those streams can improve over time. And that has happened in several Maryland watersheds. It's not all bad news in Maryland. So here's an example of what I call dropping a nuke on a wild trout stream. So this is using that Google Earth trick. This is a stream in Baltimore County near, I forget the name of near Owings Mills, called Red Run. Data from the 1990s shows that this had a very strong wild brown trout population. And if you go this green circled area, this little clock symbol on Google Earth, it brings up the slider bar. Just slide it all the way back. So this is 1993. This is what the satellite imagery looked like. You have all these farms, some forests. It doesn't look great for trout, but it's not bad. And the survey data says there was a lot of trout there at the time. Fast forward to 2017, in the same exact area. I'll do that again. Oops, let me go back. So look, all farmland, and it turns into all corporate centers, apartments, shopping malls. This is what I would call dropping a nuke on a stream. And wild trout, I think, have not been found in Red Run for about 10 years or so now. So once you bring in this kind of development, it's just inevitable you're going to have more flash floods, and over time it's going to degrade the stream. Another way to use that Google Earth trick, sometimes the most recent satellite imagery, you can't even see the stream. The trees are covering it. So just skip back a few years on this Google Earth, on this slider. So here's a stream. Looking at data, I knew it had wild trout, but I want to know, is it like a slow moving stream? Is it a nice rocky stream? And I found this imagery from 2008. And you can very clearly see the stream here. You can see big rocks. You can see little waterfalls. And this, when you look at this imagery compared to the other imagery, you're like, wow, this looks like a great stream. So now you've got your stream that you want to go to. So how are you going to catch the trout once you get there? Some of my tips, I would say, you're likely to encounter very brushy situations. You need to make short casts, or you need to make casts in tight quarters. And the way to do that is to have a setup that you can load your line during your cast very quickly, or use other casts like bow and arrow casts. But I think the best way to do that and minimize tangles and snags, keep your leader and your tippet total length less than your rod length. I follow this rule all the time, no matter, I don't care if it's low and clear water. This just saves so much hassle dealing with snags. Brook trout and brown trout have a little bit different techniques. Brook trout are basically always hungry, with the exception of larger ones. So if you come across a spot that you think has, maybe a brook trout over 9 inches, I find them to be far less willing to take dry flies than fish 9 inches or less. Brown trout, timing is everything. Go after recent rainfall. It has 2 advantages. It will discolor the water so you can sneak up on the brown trout, and it will also cause them to feed more actively. So it just makes it a lot easier, especially if you're fishing a small stream that doesn't have a great population. You might go there in clear water and spook every fish, and you might only see like 5 brown trout. Then you might go there in high water and land 8 or 10 trout. So the difference can be that dramatic. And as far as rainfall amounts, there's some websites. I'm not gonna go to this link at the moment, but there's a website called iweathernet.com, and it'll give you rainfall totals on a map for for anywhere up to the last 72 hours. If you want to fish a small stream on the same day, I look for about 0.4 to 0.75 inches of rain for ideal conditions. If you want to fish it the next day, I look for over 3/4 of an inch. And if you have a sharp pressure fall before an incoming rain or snowstorm, that can also trigger some really fast action in my experience, even if the water's low and clear. You get those clouds rolling in and the fish sense a front coming, and they can really go crazy. April and May, I don't think there is such a thing as bad conditions on those 2 months. You've kind of lost the bitterly cold late spring days that shut fishing down, and you're before the water starts warming and fish start changing their feeding habits. And the adult fish in April and May are just kind of gorging themselves every day on the small streams. I don't like to use anything lighter than 4x tippet on small streams, and you could argue it might spook some fish. I'm not sure that's true because people are just not fishing these small streams. They're not used to seeing flies. When I use 5x tippet, I just lose a ton of flies in trees, and I hate doing that. I hate leaving a hook, dangling from a branch for a bird to eat and get tangled in. So when I use 4x and up, I really don't have that problem at all. I can usually keep the fly on long enough to go retrieve it from the branch. They also move quickly, make your first cast count. There's often only 1 fish in some of these pools, and they're going to be right in the prime spot at the upper end of the pool or right next to the best habitat. So just try not to spook them, stay low, make a good cast.
Yeah, and Andrew, just to follow up on that comment, I mean, I think the number one thing if you want to be a really excellent small stream angler is just understanding this isn't spring creek fishing. You're not going to work a single hole for 20 minutes. It's 1-2 casts and move on. You're moving pretty fast.
Yeah, I totally agree. If you come to a massive pool, or if I come to a massive pool in a stream and I don't get one on my first few casts, maybe I'll spend 5 minutes there. That's about my max on any given spot. Here's an example. I snuck Greg in another picture here, but he's doing a great job there, staying low. He's kind of casting from like below the tail out of the pool. I'm sorry. And, you do that whenever possible. You can even duck behind rocks. Get creative with staying hidden, and you'll be rewarded. Fly selection for brook trout, the smaller ones, as I said, they'll eat pretty much anything. The largest individuals, though, are going to be in the best cover, and they need to be drawn out from that cover more often than not. The best fly I've found to do this is a golden stonefly nymph. Woolly buggers would be a close second. Browns, highly situational for what kind of fly you use. So you kind of do it based on the water conditions. Low and clear water, just your standard dry flies and nymphs. On small streams, I'm not really a fan of dry droppers because maybe it's just a me problem, but I always end up with some really bad tangles. I like to just go with a single fly. But with that said, dry droppers are extremely effective. High water, it doesn't matter if it's off color or clear, in my opinion, that's streamer time. I think streamers work well more often than not. And cone head or jig head patterns are best because they get down right into the nooks and crannies where the brown trout are hiding out. Because these streams see little pressure, I don't think fly selection is all that important. Stealth is far more important. If I'm on a stream I've never been to before, I like to just cover water with streamers, no matter what the water conditions are like, even if it's low and clear, because in low and clear water, they might be less likely to commit to eating a fly, but they'll still dart out from cover. They may commit, and even if they don't, now you know that fish is there, and you can come back to it. If you watch your radar, look for some rain, you can go back to it. Must-have flies. I really like the larger flies or the larger food items on small streams. I think mostly are like 1 to 2 inches long. Maybe 3 inches long if you get some big sculpins or chubs. But flies that imitate those are olive woolly buggers with a cone head again to get it down. Golden stonefly nymph. Generic nymphs like a hare's-ear, yellow stimulator dry flies, foam ants I really like for brook trout. For brook and brown, I like any kind of caddis dry fly. Green weenie is invaluable in low water. And if you're chasing browns in high water, my number one fly for that is it's called a meat whistle. And it's basically a slump buster on a jig hook with some rubber legs. And I like that in black or olive color. I use black if the water's really muddy. If it's a little more clear, I'll use olive. And that fly is usually a size 4, maybe a size 2. I might be off on that. But, and here's an example of a really nice wild brown trout that fell for my favorite fly, which is the olive woolly bugger. I'm going to very quickly try to go through this summary of like kind of what's in each county, where you'll find trout in central Maryland. It's kind of these green areas. It's kind of like overall it's kind of like a triangle shape, north and west of the I-95 corridor. And then there's kind of a hole there, which is like, just too much farmland in that area. But I'll try and go very quickly through this because I don't want to go too long here. So Cecil County, let's go back to the map. So Cecil County is this one up in the northeast corner of Maryland. And not many people know there are wild trout there, but not only are there trout there are about 10 brown trout streams there. It's mostly in the Octoraro Creek watershed and some direct tributaries to the Susquehanna River. There's not a whole lot of public access there. One stream that, at least recently, that you can fish is it's called Basin Run, and this is a picture of Basin Run that flows into Octorara Creek. And that's had a substantial brown trout population for decades. Hartford County, the main wild trout area there is the Deer Creek watershed. And interestingly, the Deer Creek watershed has about as many brook trout streams as it does brown trout streams, and a couple of them are mixed. DNR data is kind of sparse in Hartford County, so there are definitely the potential for a lot more wild trout streams to be found there. DNR is getting to it. It's just hard for them to get their crews up there. It's kind of, and even if you're trying to drive up there to fish, it's kind of far away. Deer Creek has really good public access. I'd recommend, just explore the Deer Creek watershed. Some of its tributaries that have wild trout are on public land, related to like parks along Deer Creek. So here's a picture of Deer Creek. I think Deer Creek is one of the prettiest streams in Maryland. Baltimore County, it has a lot of numbers of streams. It doesn't always have the quality of streams, with the exception of like the gunpowder obviously is phenomenal. And there's some tributaries that are really good, but most of the streams here, I'm saying there's 60 streams here in Baltimore County with brown trout. A lot of them don't really have trout over 12 inches. So just keep that in mind about Baltimore County. Every single tributary I've explored between Pretty Boy Dam and Loch Raven has had at least a few brown trout. And they can also be found in some more urban environments like Jones Falls, and some tributaries even to Loch Raven have brown trout. Brook trout have declined rapidly in Baltimore County, as mentioned earlier, but they're still present in 30 different streams there. And probably about half of them also have brown trout in there. So we'll see if the brook trout can hang on in spite of the brown trout there. And again, the gunpowder drainage, I know everyone talks about it, but even its tributaries have really good public access. So that's kind of the main area to spend time in Baltimore County. This is my largest brook trout from Baltimore County. This was a tributary of the gunpowder tailwater. Carroll County, unfortunately, it's mostly private land, so there are some trout streams there. I estimate, by the way, these numbers, I'm getting them from, the resources I mentioned earlier and my own personal exploration. And, a lot of it's just like, publicly available data that DNR has out there. So brown trout in 14 streams, brook trout in 6 different streams. And that's kind of where the upper gunpowder watershed carries over into a corner of Carroll County. It's easy to think of those as Baltimore County streams. Carroll County has great access to stock trout waters like Morgan Run, but its wild trout waters are almost entirely on private land. And it did have more brook trout, but most of them were lost prior to 1990. Carroll County, typically what you see is streams like this, where it's kind of low gradient. It's actually quite similar to the Patuxent up there. And you have these woody bend pools where you'll have brown trout, and other spots on these streams are not that great. Howard County surprisingly has 6 brown trout streams. There are no known remaining brook trout in Howard County. They were in some Patapsco tributaries until within the past 10 years. And they may, DNR may still try to get those restarted. But at the moment, I don't think there's any brook trout in Howard County. I would love to be wrong though. I'm counting the Patuxent River and some of its tributaries in the Howard County total. And then once you get outside of that area, the wild trout are pretty spotty. Not really fishable populations, but they are there. This was a Howard County wild brown trout, very healthy fish that, no one's going to mistake that one for a stocked fish. Montgomery County has 5 brown trout streams. 2 of them are upper Patuxent tributaries. And then there's one other, and then there's Paint Branch and one of its tributaries, which, despite all of the development around that and, the long storied history of the battle to save that stream, the population has degraded significantly, but the brown trout are still hanging on. And for the last 10 years, when they survey almost the whole length of Paint Branch, they find fewer than 10 fish total. So young trout and adults combined, fewer than 10 fish. And somehow those trout are still there. So given that, I would say please do not fish Paint Branch. If they're ever going to recover, we can't afford to be, having an accidental mortality of one of the 2 fish that's left in there. So last known brook trout in Montgomery County was 10 Mile Creek into the late 1980s. They were present there. This is Scott Branch, which flows into the Patuxent. It's entirely within Montgomery County, and it does support brown trout reproduction. Frederick County, what it lacks in numbers of streams, it more than makes up for in quality. Brown trout are in 10 streams, brook trout in 15 streams. There's a decent amount of overlap between the 2. The wild trout are primarily confined to Catoctin Mountain. There's a few exceptions in the lower elevations, but those are extremely marginal wild trout populations, and they're all brown trout. You're talking they're on the level of Paint Branch, very, very few fish. The primary wild trout fisheries there are Big Hunting, Little Hunting watershed, and Fishing Creek watershed. There's other ones there, but they're smaller or the populations aren't as strong. Fishing Creek watershed, by all metrics, is Maryland's healthiest brook trout population east of Cumberland. And yet DNR, for whatever, I think to appease the people in the area who want to fish for hatchery fish, they dump in excess of 2,000 rainbow trout into Fishing Creek every spring, and I personally think that's just unacceptable. The chance of introducing disease and the competition for space with 2,000 hatchery rainbow trout, I don't think there's any reason why DNR should still be taking that risk, given how stressed Maryland's brook trout populations are. Here's an example of a brook trout from Fishing Creek. Just phenomenal colors on the fish up there. Okay, so that's kind of a wrap on the central region as a whole, but now I really want to focus on the upper Patuxent watershed. So just really quickly, I want to switch over to a map. Do you guys see a map right now?
No.
Okay, let me try and...
Hey, Andrew, you might have to reshare.
Yeah, I don't know how to stop sharing. Oh, wait. Okay, wait, I'll get it. Okay, so here's a map I developed. So based on, angler reports, DNR survey data, MBSS survey data, what I did was I mapped out where wild trout are present and then, split it up based on, so in Pennsylvania, they rate wild trout populations based on their biomass as A, B, C, or D. So the highest section we have here is on the main stem of the Patuxent, upstream of Annapolis Rock Road. DNR finds that population to be 20 to 25 kilograms per hectare of only wild trout, not including stock trout. So in Pennsylvania, that would equate to a Class B population. And then there are some other tributaries where you have a little bit better than a marginal population. But the point I want to make here is this is a extremely extensive network of areas where brown trout are surviving and reproducing, and it's all connected. There's no dams blocking a trout in Annapolis Rock from moving to Cabin Branch to spawn. If for some reason one wanted to do that, there's no impediment. And interconnected streams, interconnected watersheds tend to produce some pretty large brown trout. And it's true for brook trout as well, but there's no brook trout in this watershed. So now if I'll go back to my one last point, so much of this is on public land. So really you have a resource that is interconnected, many, many miles of publicly accessible, reproducing wild brown trout population in spite of its location, in spite of all the farmland, in spite of all the development. These fish are there and they're actually doing quite well. I'm going to go back to PowerPoint. So as I just said, those were all the good things. It's interconnected. Everywhere upstream of Triadelphia Reservoir, plus at least 4 tributaries, supports wild fish. And it does produce large wild fish on occasion. The bad things are there's a lot of silt runoff from farms into the headwaters and into tributaries. There's also long sections that the habitat is not very good. It's wide and shallow, and that water gets really warm in the summer. This is one of those streams I'm talking about where the trout just have to survive for a while, and they'll totally shut down feeding for a while because the water temperatures will get close to 80 degrees in the upper Patuxent. But even with that, there is still a significant wild trout population, which I think just speaks to how adaptable brown trout are. The other thing that I think is a major negative factor in the upper Patuxent is the heavy stocking it receives. These hatchery fish, and I know people like to fish it. I'm not knocking fishing for stock trout in a broad sense. I just think in this location, you're putting thousands of fish in an area that create competition for food and space, and it also brings in heavy angling pressure. So wild trout tend to, they avoid the pressure, avoid the 5-pound stocked rainbows that have been dumped into their hole, and they'll move into shallower water, and it decreases their survival rates. Sean Beck was kind enough to provide a whole slew of photos of wild trout that he's caught from the upper Patuxent watershed. And I just, it's one thing for me to sit here and tell you guys there's wild trout there, but, Sean is catching them frequently. So, it's better to show you. So, here's a little one, young of the year. And then as we go through here, we'll just see, kind of how many different year classes of wild fish are surviving and doing quite well in the upper Patuxent. So this is a little one. Thanks again, Sean. Getting a little bigger here. That's 2, maybe 3-year-old fish. And now we're really stepping it up. This is, I think Sean said this one was about 15 inches. That's nice clean fins, nice coloration, nice dark spot behind the eye, which is usually indicative of a wild fish. Now we're really talking. This one was 17 inches, caught in the upper Patuxent watershed. And I think many of you guys have seen this picture before from this year. Sean caught this absolutely enormous, flawless wild brown trout that was over 20 inches long. So we have reproduction, we have big fish, we have tributaries that support reproduction, and we have great public access. So, and this is the home stream of PPTU. It's so close to large angling centers And I think it ought to be recognized as the wild trout fishery that it is, and it should be protected as such. So how can TU protect the wild brown trout population there? There's no question that the stream has problems, and I would say you factor in climate change, it is really a risk of being a lost population, but I'm encouraged by how many tributaries support reproduction. I think that will offset a lot of the problems that it has. So one thing we can do, I started a project with NCCTU to monitor water temperature in Catoctin Mountain brook trout streams. And the data allowed us to identify some warm water influences and also like cold water, high groundwater areas. And I think the same thing should be done in the upper Patuxent. You want to identify your cold water and work to protect that. And also, if you find these warm water tributaries, see if there's a way we can do some work to cool that water down. And as a result, cool kind of the whole main stem of the river so it's less stressful for the fish in the summer. I think riparian buffers is the way to do that. It'll accomplish, protecting and cooling the harmful warm water spots. But to do that, the problem isn't really on the parkland. It's upstream of the parkland on private lands, on the tributaries, where people are farming, and that's just naturally going to increase your silt runoff, and there's more development up there, and it all comes back, in my opinion, to riparian buffer work, and I think Embrace a Stream would be a great avenue to pursue that. I do also believe that reducing stocking in the upper Patuxent watershed would yield some tangible benefits, but it's something that, we should have some data that bears that out. And I would say the first step would be to stop stocking brown trout in this watershed. Then when people keep catching brown trout, that they're all wild fish. It will kind of just allow you to get a full picture of what's really there right now. And I also think there should be no late fall stockings of this watershed. There was a stocking last year in, I believe, early December. Over 1,000 fish, large fish, a lot of angler attention as a result. The wild trout are trying to spawn in November and into early December. So we sent all this attention to the stream and people waiting around right after the spawn finished up. I don't think that's a smart move to protect wild trout, and Trout Unlimited is responsible for protecting wild trout, protecting cold water resources. We have a great resource here, and I think it deserves, to not have people trampling over freshly laid eggs in the stream.
That was the first fall stocking in 20 years, Andrew. It was because the hatchery had to get rid of their fish. We didn't want it, but we had to take them.
We're going to have a Q&A discussion in a minute here. And I just want to make my last point. The catch and release regulations are great on the upper Patuxent. So if that ever comes up for debate, obviously Trout Unlimited should continue to support that. So I want to say thanks everyone for your time. This last picture here is probably my favorite fish I've caught in Maryland, and the only wild tiger trout I have ever caught. This was from Owens Creek in Frederick County, and very unique, rare hybrid fish. And I got very fortunate to catch that one. Even though it's a 4-inch long fish, I thought that's my favorite of all the trout I've caught. And yeah, at this point, I'd like to open it up to everyone for some Q&A, some discussion.
Hey, Andrew, I'm gonna go ahead and I just wanted to say thank you for this really good presentation. Obviously very enlightening to our friends here in PPTU, one thing I want to make clear is that we in NCCT we're not here to pick a fight. We're certainly not here to throw stones. What we're hoping to impress upon PPTU, Andrew and I, and some of the other sort of younger folks here within TU, we've spent a lot of time fishing in the Upper Patuxent watershed over the last couple of years, really exploring and getting a sense of the fishery that's up there. And when Andrew first approached me, I was a little bit skeptical myself that the wild brown trout populations in the Upper Patuxent were as strong as they are. But over the last, basically, I would say 16 months or so, we've spent a significant amount of time fishing up there. It is actually more impressive than I think I understood. So that's all I really have to say. And Andrew, thank you again.
Andrew, thank you very much. Questions for Andrew?
Hey, thanks, guys. I was glad to. I really appreciate you guys having me.
You're welcome. Questions? Anyone have any questions they'd like to ask?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Am I muted, or can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yep.
Hi, Andrew. First of all, that was an excellent presentation. That was great detail. You obviously done a lot of research, and I found it well done. So thank you for that. My question was, why do you think a number 10 golden stonefly is as effective as you say for brook trout? It seems a little counterintuitive to me, and I enjoy brook trout fishing very much, in wild brook trout fishing. So, any thoughts on that particular pattern and why?
I think it was something I noticed growing up fishing for brook trout. And I grew up in southeast Pennsylvania, and some of the brook trout there, the brook trout streams there they're very similar to like Maryland's Piedmont streams, and I noticed a lot of them had. I may be able to pull this up for you. A lot of them had these golden stoneflies that would be, they're not the giant golden stoneflies. They would be, I'm sorry.
You mean like the yellow sallies, the smaller stoneflies?
Yeah, not quite that small. So like there's the giant stones, which can be almost like 1.5 inches long. But there's these other ones that I find are quite common in the Piedmont brook trout streams. They are, I'm trying to pull up a picture, but they're about 3/4 of an inch long. And I find the key is to this nymph pattern is to get the rubber legs on there and get like a very bright gold underbelly. And I think these larger brook trout are hanging out under rocks, waiting for larger meals. And they don't necessarily always show themselves on the surface for dry flies. I think it's just that yellow, that flash of yellow and those rubber legs.
It's enough to trigger something.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well done. Thank you.
Hey, thank you.
Andrew, thank you for your presentation. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
My name is Stephen. Have you ever used any of the soft hackle flies on any of these brook trout streams? And if so, have you been successful?
I have only randomly used soft tackle flies. I've had better luck with them on the more pressured brown trout streams like Beaver Creek or up in Pennsylvania. All the famous streams up there, soft tackles can work really well because sometimes they're a little different from what everyone else is using. Also, I think soft tackles generally, you kind of fish them down and across, and some of these small brook trout streams I don't think really lend themselves to fishing that way. But if you there are so many times when I'm fishing for brook trout and I'm like, I could throw a marshmallow in there and they would eat it.
Well, thanks, Andrew. Great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
I've got a quick question, if I could, Ken and Drasco. It seems like the streams are so small and the populations are so small that even a small increase in pressure on them might really deteriorate the resource. So, do you have a feel for the carrying capacity of some of these streams? Are they able to handle any attention they might get, and hence more footprints in the watershed?
I think it's a very real concern on the brook trout streams in central Maryland. These brook trout streams, you're talking, brook trout might exist in half a mile of stream. They might have like 5 spawning pairs of fish and 20 young of year, and that's the population. So, those streams, Maryland DNR rightly protects those. I don't particularly like to give specifics on those streams. But when it comes to brown trout, I haven't ever heard of a case of a brown trout population being lost due to increased pressure. That's not to say you won't see a decrease in larger fish if certain types of people who want to keep wild brown trout are going to these streams and harvesting them.
I'll get off in 15 minutes, all right?
Yeah. If I think angling pressure and the quality of the population doesn't have a ton of correlation, but there's a huge correlation in the perceived fishing experience. I think there's so many of these brown trout streams where you have like half a mile of access, and on a good day you'll catch 5 or 6 brown trout all under 12 inches. I think there's so many of those streams that it's hard to imagine any one of them getting more pressure to the point that it's detrimental. But the larger streams, they handle the pressure quite well. So I think brown trout are just they're just better survivors. They're harder to catch. Your average person who is watching this presentation, well, I mean, I don't know for sure, but I think most of us are catch and release fishermen. So, and one last point, if you get to a stream after someone's fished there, you're probably not going to catch much. So, then it's easy to think, oh, the population's down, but really you might have been 2 hours behind someone who put all the fish down.
Andrew, I'm going to jump in here. I want to say thanks again. This has been fantastic. And I think my takeaway is that, these are fragile ecosystems that these native brook trout live in. And I, for one, want to keep them around as long as possible. To the point of what can we do with other streams, whether it's in our backyard or other places, we need to think about how can we do improvements to help make sure they have cold water for survival. And, I think that's something that's going to take time and years, but I think between not only our 2 chapters, but other chapters in Maryland, because you covered the entire Piedmont area, there's a lot of work to be done. And I think there's an opportunity for all the chapters to come together to try and help make this a better place for those brook trout, for the native trout, whether it's brook or brown or whatever it might be. But I really do appreciate this. I do have a question here for you. It came in from Michael Bromowitz, and he says years before Google Earth, he used a mapping system called the DLORME, LORME map system for blue lines. Are you familiar with that? And if you are, do you have any comments about it?
Yeah, I used that for in Pennsylvania, and it was very, I thought that was a very detailed map. What I like about Google Maps is having it at your fingertips. I mean, a map is at your fingertip too, but having something on your phone that you can pull up wherever is it's really changed the way that you can go about exploring for streams. The Delorme Atlas though was, I mean, that was the one map book that I had when I was a teenager and really getting started on all this wild trout stuff.
Well, Mike Abramowitz is also a teenager, just so everyone knows. So a teenager at heart, anyway. Andrew Reichart, Andrew Sarcinello, anything else you guys want to add for tonight?
No, just thank you so much for thank you PPTU for organizing this joint meeting. It was really nice to get the two clubs or two chapters together, and thanks Randy and Karan for making this happen.
Any other questions? Thank you. Any other questions for Andrew before we do sign off for the night?
Yeah, hi. I've got a quick question. This is Brian Bernstein. Andrew, could you just go over again early in your presentation that Maryland was the most southern state? I didn't quite follow that as compared to Virginia. There was no southern state for something, and I wasn't following that.
Okay, yeah. So let me let's see. I'm just trying to find the slide.
On the Piedmont. This is on the Piedmont.
Yep.
You don't go south of the Potomac and find trout on the Piedmont.
Yeah. So this map, these green areas have some wild trout of varying strength populations, but really this area, say from this number 10 over, is that's kind of, those are all Piedmont region streams. And notice they kind of cut off around northern Montgomery County. And if you go down into Virginia, east of the mountains, there are no, there may be one or two exceptions up in this corner of northern Virginia, but beyond that, if you go any further south, I think the streams just get too hot, and the geology is not favorable for wild trout. So in Virginia, other than one or two exceptions, all of your wild trout are in elevated areas. And then as you continue down into North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina, all those streams are also high elevation, cold water. And once you get out of the mountains, the streams just can't support the wild fish.
Thank you. That's helpful. Appreciate it.
I have a question.
Oh, sorry.
May I ask a question?
Yes,
Yep.
please go ahead.
Thank you. I have a question regarding spawning times. Is there a time where we should just stop fishing when all these wild fish are trying to reproduce?
I'm going to jump in here and say that is a great question. Please go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, very timely question. I would say right now, you probably shouldn't be out fishing for brook trout. I know that on Catoctin Mountain they start a little earlier than these other Piedmont streams I'm talking about, but I think with the brook trout, I'd say October into the first half of November is what you would want to avoid fishing for brook trout. For brown trout, they run a little bit later. I've seen them even on Catoctin Mountain. I've seen them on reds in early December, and I know in the upper Patuxent watershed, I've seen them, primarily in November. And it seems like the peak is, and I know some streams in Pennsylvania and southeast Pennsylvania with similar climate that have they kind of say the peak of the brown trout spawn is around Thanksgiving. So I'd say brook trout, you probably want to stop fishing for them in October. Brown trout, you're probably good until the first week of November, maybe earlier in Catoctin Mountain.
Hey guys.
That does vary by region. Go ahead, Bob.
Good presentation, by the way. One of our members emailed in and asked if your presentation material would be available to them. Is that something you guys could share? Or?
Yeah,
I let me just jump in here. I think Monty, did we not record this presentation?
Yes, we did. It's recorded.
So this is recorded, so we can share it on our Facebook and our website, pptu.org. And I'm sure Andrew can do that for NCCTU also. So it's available and it's recorded. Does that answer the question for you, Bob?
I think he was looking for the PowerPoint.
Okay.
It
I
does answer the question.
Yeah, I personally don't have a problem sharing the PowerPoint with a TU member who asks for it.
Yeah, I think having Andrew's should be voiceover for that to add value to it and to unpack those slides is important. So I think the recording does work well for that.
Great. I'll let them know that. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
And Andrew, I just wanted to jump in to answer Todd Crook's question about whether there are planned projects involving whether PPTU, NCCTU, or DNR that members can get involved with in terms of brook trout remediation projects. NCCTU, Andrew alluded to it around the Catoctin Mountain region. NCCTU is working on a project right now with Maryland DNR and the U.S. Geological Survey, that stream temperature monitoring project. We're doing a watershed-wide scale project where we're basically getting an understanding of the entire temperature regime for that watershed. The end goal of that project is to identify specific problem areas, and Andrew Sarcinello alluded to. The goal from there is to actually do sort of boots on the ground stream remediation projects. So whether it's areas that have been clear cut, and so there may be tree planting opportunities, whether it's basically runoff problems, so we might want to be building up riparian buffer zones. Those projects are in the works based upon the findings that we have on this project with USGS and Maryland DNR.
Thank you, Andrew. Andrew, I'm going to split a hair here, and that is, can those riparian projects, et cetera, be done on state land, or do they have to be done on private land?
It's sort of a mix in the Catoctin area. A lot of it's whether it's state land, some of it's actually owned by the city of Frederick. Actually, a decent amount of the land on Catoctin Mountain is actually part of what's called the is it, Andrew? Is it the Frederick Water Management Area? I believe it's called.
Yeah, I mean, loosely called the Frederick Watershed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
But a lot of it is public land, whether it's state or locally or county owned.
One thing that kind of has become apparent to me as I've been exploring these streams is where you have parkland on any of these streams, that's often where it's like the most shade, and the forest has been growing on its own for decades. And then once you get out of the parkland, which is often the headwaters of the streams, you're on private land, and they're basically doing whatever they want. So in terms of where you would do work to create an improvement, a lot of it is the opportunity for improvement is heavily skewed toward private land, in my opinion.
And upstream.
Yeah.
Thank you. Listen, it's an open mic night, so more questions for Andrew, please ask.
Yes, I have one more question. I understand, Andrew, you wrote a book. Where can I find the book?
There's a GoFundMe page. I have it paused at the moment, and there may be a few people listening in who had reached out to me about how the fundraising is paused. I'm thinking there's been quite a few people who have reached out about it. With this meeting, I'll probably reopen that I apologize if I couldn't get to people individually who asked about it. I was just trying to scramble to get this ready, but yeah, there's a GoFundMe. Dave, if you want to reach out to me, I can get you squared away. So to be clear, I will reopen that GoFundMe page. So it'll, so what you'll have to do is donate on GoFundMe, and then I'll have to email you the PDF copy of it.
Thank you,
Can I
Andrew.
just reach out to you via Instagram? Because I follow you on Instagram.
Yeah, that works. Yep.
Okay,
And I'll
great.
send
Thank
you
you.
the link.
Thank you.
Hey, this is Karan Singh from PPTU. So just quickly, Andrew's being very, very modest here and a real gentleman, but I talked to him about the book that he published, and one of his concerns that he didn't really articulate here, and I commend him for that, is that he doesn't want some of the location information that was in his book to get out, right? Because then you may get things like poachers showing up or people coming and destroying the environment. But his book does have a lot of information about his research into the streams and how to go about, I guess, doing the environmental assessments of streams, which I found very valuable. But folks who do get a copy of the book, do be aware that it is a very sensitive habitat, and we don't want tons of people showing up and destroying the ecosystem we're trying to protect.
Yeah, for people who aren't familiar with this book project that I did, this was about 2 years ago. I had it on Instagram, but it was kind of like it was only for people who, I wanted to keep the potential for abuse of these places low. But another way I did that was, certain places, if data showed they were just too fragile, they're just not in the book at all. So I don't necessarily want people to think I have a book that is full of super sensitive streams. I think most of them are brown trout streams, and they're on public land, and they're just kind of like average streams. There's a few good ones in there, but I don't really tell people which ones are the best. So it's just kind of like, hey, they're here, kind of deal.
Yeah, good point. I hate to see a stream get burned or burn a spot so that everyone shows up on the same day to go fishing for those 3 native trout. That would be awful. Karan, thank you for raising that point. I do want to mention a couple things, and I see in the chat on the side that there was some talk about it, that the Maryland DNR is going to be offering, it does have proposals up about brook trout catch and release. And we've had some initial involvement with that. Andrew Reichart, do you want to make any mention of where that stands now and what is going to happen down the road in the immediate future for those proposals?
Yeah, so a lot of the PPTU folks should have received our email, sort of the email advocacy campaign that we had back in May and June around the brook trout catch and release regs. This regulation would make basically would make it illegal to harvest brook trout east of Route I-81. Which, as Andrew documented, that's a significant portion of the brook trout sort of populations of Maryland. Obviously, you have a very large population, or a significant portion of our populations of brook trout are in the Savage and North Branch Potomac watersheds. We're going to be rolling out a public comment campaign through the council for Maryland within the next 5 or 6 days. With some pre-populated language that you can use. You also feel free to reach out to Maryland DNR and make your voice heard in your own words if you feel so inclined. I think this regulation is very likely to be adopted. We've already submitted several hundred. I think it was TU submitted about 450 public comments in favor across the state back when the first round of public comments were collected. Long story short, definitely feel free to make yourself heard in the second round before it is actually codified. But I think it's going to be very promising and a good thing overall for our native brook trout populations in Maryland.
Thank you. Catch and release. That's the bottom line. Another question. Any other questions? Excuse me, for Andrew.
What's the biggest small stream wild Maryland brand that you got, and do you have a photo of it?
Sorry, Iggy, what was that?
What's the biggest small stream wild Maryland brown you got, and do you have a photo of it?
Yeah, it's not in the presentation, but I can probably pull it up. You guys still see just the presentation, right?
Yeah, for now.
Okay. All right. Give me a minute. I was trying to decide if I should throw it in here or not. I just gotta find it. Okay.
Iggy, we all know where the largest wild browns in Maryland can be.
Okay, I'll have it up in a sec here, Iggy. Okay, so this was my largest Maryland small stream wild brown trout. It was 25 inches long.
That's a very rare fish to find. If you're talking about
stunning.
If you're talking about the Piedmont area, that's a very rare fish.
Yeah, this was. It wasn't insanely unexpected for the stream because I had already caught fish in like the 20 to 22 inch range there. But a 25 versus a 22 is just a whole different animal in terms of how rare it is. So yeah, that was stunning. And actually the next year I hooked the same fish again, and someone else who's been there recently says it actually may still be alive because they've seen a fish about the same size in the same spot. So and this picture was 4 years ago. So yeah, there are some real monsters out there. In terms of big fish, there are not a whole lot of streams in Maryland that produce legitimate 20-inch plus fish. I've in fact only caught them from this one stream. So obviously I'm not going to say which one.
No. I'm going to assume it's a smaller stream, but a fish that size is going to be about how old? Does anyone have an idea? Any guesses?
That's a good question. I don't know. I'd like to hear some people's guesses. I'd say at least 10 years old.
Yeah, it's at least 10 years.
What do y'all think? 10?
Yeah, 10 to 15.
That's an old fish.
Dang.
That is a very old fish to live that long. That's amazing. That's a resource to preserve. There's no doubt about it. That's a resource to preserve.
Yeah, if you want to know a crazy statistic, Randy, brown trout can live up to 27 years.
Wow.
On pellets, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Hey, Andrew, I'm gonna go to one more thing. We talked about new regulations for brook trout in the state. That's great news, and there'll be more information coming out fairly soon. But I also think next year, as a united group of chapters in Maryland, we're talking about getting vanity plates that are TU or brook trout related. Do you have any information to share for this group, even though it's a slight preview? Can you share some information for everyone on that?
Yeah, of course. So we were approached by the State Fishing Commission to produce basically some Trout Unlimited license plates. Brian Coakley's on the call. He's a longtime CCA member. They're also going to be CCA are sort of our striped bass, redfish, bluefish kind of brethren on the saltwater side are also going to be producing their own license plate. we are going to have a Trout Unlimited plate that you can get through. I want to keep calling it the DMV, but it's actually the MVA. That you'll be able to get through the MVA starting next year with artwork that's actually commissioned by that we commissioned by a longtime TU college volunteer named Morgan Stum. She's currently working for TU in Western Maryland on the Upper Savage and North Branch brook trout sort of projects. She's also an artist, so she's going to be designing a very unique, very cool sort of TU license plate for the state of Maryland that you'll be able to get starting 2021.
Excellent. Looking forward to it. Looking forward. It sounds great. I'm looking forward to seeing her art too. Andrew and Andrew, thank you both. Karan, thank you. Mati, thank you for hosting this tonight. I don't want to keep people any longer than they want to stay on. We've got about 30 some odd, almost 40 people on right now. Please ask one last question, two last questions if you got them. We want to make sure that if you have a question, you get them asked. So this is open mic, like we said. So any more questions? Andrew's available, or anyone else is available. Not hearing any questions.
Oh, I got one quick question.
Please do. Go ahead.
It seems I'm affiliated with the Maryland chapter. It seems one of our biggest challenges is not the public lands, as you stated earlier, but the private lands. And I think we struggle sometimes, I know I do, with getting private landowners to have them be approachable and to try to work with them. And I wonder if that's just an area that we should collectively talk about more, of sort of a private lands initiative, try to get more private landowners knowledgeable of these gems they have and how to help them protect it. So I'd just be curious what other folks think about that.
Yeah, Scott, I think that's a really good question. I mean, I would argue that's really where TU excels in a way that sometimes other conservation groups don't, is partnering with private landowners. Here in Maryland, it's not as much of a focus for us with TU, but like using Pennsylvania, I think, sort of our northern neighbors as an example, so much of the conservation work that they do is on private lands. And a lot of, you're our Embrace the Stream coordinator for the state of Maryland. But in Pennsylvania, a lot of those EAS grants actually go to projects that are done on private land in Pennsylvania. And I think that's something we need to think about as we move forward, particularly if we're looking at potential stream improvement projects here in the Patuxent watershed, in the headwaters with some of those private landowners, some of those farmers, is showing them potential value to them. It's great to show them the wild fisheries that exist, but I think we have to also demonstrate why, frankly, from somewhat of a dollars and cents point of view, why they benefit directly from having basically an outside group go onto their private land and do stream remediation projects. So it's something I think we have a lot to learn from Pennsylvania. We have a lot to learn from some of the folks in Central Maryland and some of the folks in Virginia, but it's definitely one of the strengths TU has, is that ability to go onto private land.
Yeah, thank you. Good stuff.
Great question. Any more? Another question, please. Well, who wants to give the closing remarks?
Andy, I think that's you.
I'm going to pass it over to Andrew Sarcinello. Andrew, closing remarks are going to come from you, my friend. So go for it.
All right. Well, once again, thanks for having me. My involvement in TU was, I've just kind of been, this kind of small stream trout nut on Instagram, and Andrew brought me in and was like, hey, kind of like how you can probably help TU, because I've just spent so much time on these streams, and I think just this past year I've felt kind of very fortunate to have taken that step into working with TU, and I'm glad to be able to be in a position to share some of this information. And I just hope everyone reading it just respect these resources. You don't know what you have till it's gone, so let's just do whatever we can to keep these wild trout healthy. We're as Trout Unlimited, we have a lot more power than the average person to make that a reality. So that's all I got for tonight. I want to say thanks again.
Well, thank you. It was an excellent presentation.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you,
Everybody.
Karan. Thank you, NCCTU. Thank you, Monty, for organizing this. Thank you for all the PPTU members that joined us tonight. Listen, and the folks that joined us from other chapters too. So I thought that was fabulous. I would love to see us be doing more of these down the road. And please feel free to join us for our outings that we have scheduled for Big Springs on October 25th. But please do register in advance. So Andrew, thank you very much. Andrew Reichart, thank you very much. And everybody, have a great night. And to Ken Bauer, thank you very much for being our fishing mentor for the last 17 years at PPTU. You're a fantastic man and done great things. So with that, I'm going to say, have a good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
Everybody, thank you.